Do you remember the things everyone loved from the 1980s? The ones that made everyday life feel exciting and full of possibility? These were the trends, toys, and moments that shaped family routines, school days, and nights with friends in ways we can still feel. But when the world moved on so quickly, what pieces of that happiness did we quietly leave behind? Cabbage Patch Kids were not just dolls. They were a cultural earthquake in the 1980s. Parents lined up outside toy stores at dawn, hoping to get their hands on one of these soft-faced, yarn-haired dolls that came with adoption certificates and unique names. Each doll felt like more than a toy. It felt like a family member, adopted rather than bought. Kids proudly showed off their adoption papers, complete with the official seal, as if they had just signed into a lifelong bond. The craze reached fever pitch during holiday seasons, when fights broke out in aisles and news reports showed parents scrambling for stock. These dolls were made in such limited quantities at first that they instantly became must-haves, skyrocketing in value and sparking what many consider the first real toy frenzy of modern America. The design itself was unusual compared to traditional hard plastic dolls. The soft, squishy faces made them feel warm and approachable. Even children who usually were not drawn to dolls wanted one, because owning a Cabbage Patch Kid meant you were part of the moment. They were displayed proudly in bedrooms, dressed in tiny outfits, and often taken everywhere from school to playgrounds. The craze eventually died down, but even now, spotting one in a thrift store or attic can transport people instantly back to childhood. For a brief, shining window of the 1980s, nothing captured the imagination of kids and the determination of parents quite like Cabbage Patch Kids. Walkmans changed music forever. Before they arrived, music lived in stereos or record players that anchored rooms, meaning you listened at home or with friends. When Sony introduced the Walkman in the 1980s, suddenly music became personal, portable, and private. With a cassette tape and a pair of foam-covered headphones, you could walk, jog, or ride the bus with your own soundtrack in your ears. Teenagers claimed a new sense of independence, tuning out the world with their favorite mixtapes or top 40 hits. The design itself was sleek for the time, small enough to slip into a bag, yet still felt futuristic. Walkmans also turned cassette tapes into cultural icons. You could rewind, fast-forward, or record over tracks, creating your own custom playlists long before digital playlists existed. The sound of a tape clicking into place or rewinding became part of everyday life. They were not just gadgets, they were status symbols, often clipped to belts or displayed on desks as signs of modern coolness. Parents might have worried that kids were isolating themselves, but for young people, Walkmans meant freedom. Every step became a scene in your own movie, every commute a private concert. Even decades later, people remember the thrill of sliding in a fresh cassette, pressing play, and losing themselves in music that finally belonged entirely to them. Saturday morning cartoons were a weekly ritual, almost sacred to kids of the 1980s. Long before streaming or on demand, cartoons aired at specific times, and Saturday morning was when networks unleashed hours of brightly animated worlds. Children would wake up early, pour themselves a bowl of sugary cereal, and settle in front of the television, often while parents were still asleep. The lineups were carefully curated. Shows like The Smurfs, Transformers, and He-Man kept kids glued to the screen for entire mornings. For many, this was the highlight of the week, a reward after 5 long days of school. Advertisers knew it too, and toy commercials blended seamlessly with the shows, making the line between entertainment and marketing almost invisible. Still, kids did not care. They laughed, shouted at villains, and mimicked heroes in backyards and playgrounds. Saturday mornings created a communal experience where every child in America seemed to be watching the same thing at the same time. It was more than just television. It was an event. Once cable and streaming fractured viewing habits, the magic of that shared weekly ritual faded. But for those who grew up in the 1980s, the memory of curling up in pajamas, cereal in hand, while cartoons filled the morning remains one of the warmest and most universal experiences of childhood. E.T., the Extraterrestrial, was more than a movie. It was a phenomenon that reached across the globe. Released in 1982, the story of a stranded alien befriending a young boy captured hearts instantly. Families flocked to theaters, many returning multiple times, making it one of the highest-grossing films of the decade. The image of Elliot's bicycle flying across the moon became an instant cultural icon, plastered on posters, lunchboxes, and bedroom walls. E.T. himself, with his glowing finger and gentle eyes, felt real to children, as if he could show up in their own backyard. The movie's themes of friendship, wonder, and loss resonated deeply with audiences, leaving many in tears by the end. Merchandising exploded. Stuffed animals, board games, and even a famously disastrous Atari video game brought E.T. into homes everywhere. The phrase, "E.T. phone home," became one of the most quoted lines in movie history. For many kids, watching E.T. was their first theater experience, one they never forgot. Unlike other blockbusters that focused on action, this one touched the heart, reminding everyone of the magic of childhood imagination. Decades later, hearing the soaring notes of John Williams' score can still bring back that exact feeling of sitting in a darkened theater, eyes wide, as E.T. lit up the screen. Arcade games defined social life in the 1980s. Malls and standalone arcades glowed with neon lights and the constant symphony of beeps, jingles, and electronic voices. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, and Galaga were more than games. They were obsessions that devoured quarters as fast as kids could earn them. Gathering around a machine to watch a high-score attempt became a shared thrill, with crowds cheering like it was a sporting event. Arcades became hangouts where teenagers spent hours competing, flirting, and bonding over joysticks and flashing screens. There was a magic in the dim rooms where time seemed to vanish as you moved from one cabinet to another. Each game had its own cult following, and kids bragged about patterns, strategies, and how far they got before losing their last life. Tokens jingled in pockets, sweaty palms gripped buttons, and glowing screens promised adventure at every corner. By the end of the decade, home consoles started pulling players away, but for a shining moment, arcades were the center of youth culture. Walking into one today, if you can still find it, feels like stepping into a time capsule of the 1980s. The smell of popcorn, the hum of machines, and the thrill of one more quarter remain unforgettable. Big hair and hairspray became the unmistakable symbol of 1980s style. From teased bangs to towering perms, hairstyles in this decade were all about size, confidence, and flair. Both men and women embraced volume, using combs, curling irons, and endless clouds of aerosol hairspray to create looks that defied gravity. These hairstyles were bold statements, a way of saying you were here to be seen. High school yearbooks, music videos, and family photos all show the era's unmistakable hair trends, immortalized in clouds of aquanet. Entire morning routines revolved around sculpting the perfect look, and carrying a comb in your back pocket was as essential as your keys. Rock bands and celebrities took it even further, making wild, voluminous hair part of their persona. Critics might have rolled their eyes, but for people living through it, big hair was fun, expressive, and unapologetic. It was a way to stand out, to be vibrant in a world that was often beige and restrained before. Even though styles have shifted, there is still something iconic about the sight of teased bangs or a giant perm. It screams 1980s in the best possible way. Trapper Keeper notebooks turned school supplies into status symbols. With their bold designs, Velcro flaps, and built-in pockets, they were the ultimate way to keep homework and notes organized. Kids proudly carried them through hallways, showing off flashy covers decorated with rainbows, geometric shapes, or outer space themes. Opening the Velcro in class made that signature ripping sound, instantly recognizable and sometimes disruptive enough to earn glares from teachers. Inside, everything had a place. Folders, lined paper, and even secret doodles or notes passed between friends. For students, a Trapper Keeper was not just practical, it was a statement of personality. Owning one made you feel put together, even if your actual grades told a different story. Parents appreciated the organization, but kids loved the cool factor. They became such a staple that teachers even debated banning them, claiming they were too distracting. Decades later, Adults still recall the pride of picking out a new Trapper Keeper at the store, carefully choosing the design that best fit who they were. More than just paper and plastic, these notebooks captured the energy of being a student in the 1980s. Organized, expressive, and always a little loud. The Atari 2600 brought video games into living rooms for the very first time. Before then, playing games meant a trip to the arcade, but with this console, pixelated adventures arrived right at home. Released in the late 1970s but exploding in popularity in the 1980s, the Atari 2600 delivered classics like Space Invaders, Pitfall, and Adventure. Families gathered around bulky television sets, controllers in hand, competing for high scores. The graphics were simple, blocks and lines by today's standards, but at the time, they felt revolutionary. Suddenly, the living room became a playground where imagination filled in the gaps of what the pixels could not show. Kids spent hours swapping cartridges, discovering new challenges, and feeling the thrill of controlling action on the screen. The Atari 2600 created the foundation for modern gaming culture, sparking the idea that video games could be a part of daily life. Even when more advanced systems arrived, nostalgia for the Atari never faded. Today, the sight of those chunky cartridges and wood-paneled consoles still triggers warm memories of a decade when gaming first became personal. The Rubik's Cube swept across the 1980s like a puzzle storm. Brightly colored squares twisted and turned, taunting kids and adults alike with its deceptively simple design. Solving it became a badge of honor, something only the most patient or brilliant could accomplish. Many tried, twisting endlessly, only to give up with one side complete and the rest in chaos. Yet the frustration was part of the fun. It sparked determination, conversation, and even competitions. Classrooms, playgrounds, and offices buzzed with people swapping strategies, bragging about how close they came, or sheepishly admitting defeat. For some, it became a permanent desk ornament, a symbol of both genius and humility. Others peeled the stickers off in desperation, the ultimate cheat that fooled no one. Beyond being a puzzle, the Rubik's Cube became a pop culture icon, appearing in movies, television shows, and magazine covers. It represented the mix of creativity, logic, and persistence that defined the decade. Even today, solving one can feel like unlocking a piece of 1980s magic. It was not just a toy, it was a challenge that united an entire generation. Boomboxes brought music to the streets in a way nothing else had before. These portable stereos, often massive and heavy, were carried on shoulders and blasted with pride. They turned sidewalks, basketball courts, and beaches into stages, filling neighborhoods with the beats of hip-hop, pop, and rock. The sound was bold, the look was iconic, and the presence of a boombox demanded attention. For many teenagers, owning one was a ticket to coolness, a way of making your mark in public spaces. Mixtapes, carefully recorded at home, became the lifeblood of boomboxes, shared among friends or blasted for everyone to hear. They symbolized freedom, expression, and community as crowds gathered around to dance or hang out. The larger the speakers, the more impressive the statement. Critics sometimes dismissed them as noisy or intrusive, but for those who carried them, boomboxes were joy and identity rolled into one. They captured the energy of youth in the 1980s, loud, proud, and impossible to ignore. Even now, the sight of someone hoisting one on their shoulder instantly recalls the swagger and soundtracks of a decade alive with rhythm. MTV music videos changed everything about how people listened to and experienced music in the 1980s. Before MTV, you heard a song on the radio, maybe caught a performance on late-night television, and that was it. With the launch of the channel in 1981, suddenly songs had visuals, stories, and identities. A catchy tune could become unforgettable when paired with a creative video. Artists who embraced the medium, like Michael Jackson, Madonna, and Duran Duran, became larger-than-life figures, their images replayed in bedrooms across the country. For teenagers, MTV was a window into a new world of style and rebellion, a non-stop stream of fashion, choreography, and attitude. It gave birth to trends, pushed boundaries, and made the television itself part of music culture. The phrase, "I want my MTV," became a rallying cry, plastered across ads and shouted in living rooms. Music was no longer just something you listened to. It was something you watched, studied, and imitated. Overnight, stars were made not only by their voices, but by their charisma on screen. Even today, those early videos remain burned into memory, icons of a decade where sound and vision collided in the most thrilling way. Friendship pins were small, simple, and absolutely treasured. They were ordinary safety pins decorated with colorful beads worn proudly on the laces of sneakers or pinned to backpacks. Making them was half the fun. You would sit with friends, carefully threading beads into patterns that carried meaning only your group understood. Giving one away was a gesture of trust, loyalty, and connection. Kids collected them the way others might collect baseball cards, but these had far more personal weight. They told stories about who your best friends were and what groups you belonged to. A sneaker with dozens of pins was not just footwear, it was a badge of belonging. They were cheap, easy to make, and yet priceless in the way they captured the bonds of childhood. Unlike store-bought jewelry, these were crafted by hand, carrying the time and thought of the person who made them. For many, receiving a friendship pin was a highlight of school days, a small act that said, "You mattered." Looking back, it is hard not to smile at the thought of those glittering pins clinking against sneakers on playgrounds, tiny tokens of a friendship that felt unbreakable. Strawberry shortcake dolls were more than toys. They were experiences of scent, color, and charm. Each doll came dressed in pastel clothes with hair that smelled sweetly of fruit. Bedrooms filled with their fragrances, a lineup of characters like blueberry muffin and lemon meringue creating a world of whimsy. The dolls were small enough to carry everywhere, and children often staged elaborate adventures across living rooms and backyards. They stood apart from other dolls because they engaged multiple senses. You did not just play with them, you smelled them too. Their soft, round faces and gentle eyes made them approachable and comforting. For many kids, these dolls were among their very first collections, something to proudly display on shelves. Parents appreciated that they came with innocent, wholesome themes rather than edgy trends. They were gifts for birthdays, rewards for good grades, or just surprises that instantly lit up a child's face. Over time, Strawberry Shortcake expanded into cartoons, lunchboxes, and pajamas, turning into a full cultural moment. But it is the dolls themselves, with their instantly recognizable scents, that remain the strongest memory. Just one whiff of that fruity fragrance can pull someone back to the 1980s in an instant. Back to the Future was a movie that embodied everything people loved about 1980s cinema: fun, adventure, and heart. Released in 1985, it told the story of Marty McFly, a teenager who accidentally travels back to 1955 in a DeLorean that doubled as a time machine. The concept alone captured imaginations, but it was the humor, action, and emotional beats that made it unforgettable. Families packed theaters, laughing at Doc Brown's wild energy, rooting for Marty, and marveling at the idea of rewriting history. The film mixed science fiction with coming-of-age themes, creating something both thrilling and relatable. Its characters became instant icons, and lines like "Great Scott" and "This is heavy" entered everyday conversation. The movie also sparked a love of time travel stories, influencing everything from television shows to books. Merchandising exploded, from posters to toys, while the DeLorean itself became a car forever tied to pop culture. Unlike many blockbusters, Back to the Future balanced spectacle with warmth, making it appealing to both kids and adults. Watching it today still feels like stepping into the excitement of the 1980s, a reminder of how one movie could capture a generation's imagination. Swatch watches turned the simple act of telling time into a fashion statement. Introduced in the early 1980s, these Swiss-made watches were colorful, affordable, and endlessly collectible. They came in bold patterns, neon shades, and quirky designs that stood out on wrists everywhere. Kids begged for them, teens matched them with outfits, and some even wore more than one at a time. Unlike traditional watches, which were formal and expensive, Swatch watches were playful and fun. They were affordable enough that you could own several, swapping them out like accessories. Their popularity made them more than just a product. They became a trend, a way of expressing personality. Owning a Swatch was like joining a club, instantly signaling that you were tuned into the style of the decade. They were displayed in cases at malls, with kids pressing faces against glass to pick the perfect one. Today, collectors still treasure vintage Swatch designs, but for those who grew up in the 1980s, it is not just about the watch. It is about the feeling of sliding one onto your wrist and knowing you were part of something bold, colorful, and uniquely of its time. Choose Your Own Adventure books made reading interactive in a way that felt revolutionary. These slim paperbacks invited kids to step into the story, making choices that determined the outcome. At each crossroads, you decided whether to turn left, open a door, or trust a stranger. The thrill came from knowing your choice could lead to triumph or sudden disaster. Kids read them over and over, exploring every possible path, flipping back and forth until the books were worn at the edges. Unlike traditional stories, these books gave readers agency, letting them feel like heroes shaping their own destinies. They were popular in classrooms, at libraries, and on long car rides where time disappeared in a blur of decisions. The variety of themes, from space adventures to haunted houses, meant there was something for everyone. Friends compared notes, bragging about the endings they had reached, or laughing about the times they had failed. The series turned reluctant readers into book lovers by making stories into games. Looking back, these books capture the spirit of the 1980s perfectly. Playful, imaginative, and endlessly surprising. Hypercolor shirts made clothing feel like magic. These t-shirts looked normal at first glance, but touch them, breathe on them, or wear them in the sun, and the colors shifted before your eyes. They reacted to body heat, creating patterns that were unique to each moment. In school hallways, kids pressed hands against each other's sleeves to leave prints, laughing at how the colors changed. For a short time, they were the ultimate status symbol. Owning one meant you were ahead of the fashion curve. The novelty was irresistible, even if the shirts sometimes faded quickly in the wash. They represented the experimental spirit of the 1980s, when bold, playful fashion ruled. Like many fads, their popularity burned bright and fast, but the memory lingers. Seeing one today instantly recalls the excitement of discovering something new and different, when even clothing could feel like a toy. They were proof that in the 1980s, style was not just about appearance, it was about fun. Lisa Frank stationery turned schoolwork into something magical. Notebooks, folders, and stickers glowed with rainbows, unicorns, dolphins, and neon-colored animals. For kids, especially in elementary school, owning Lisa Frank supplies made homework feel less like a chore and more like an adventure. Shopping for school supplies became exciting, with aisles filled with dazzling designs. Every folder felt like a tiny piece of fantasy, transforming the dullness of math worksheets into something bright and fun. Collecting Lisa Frank became a hobby in itself, with kids comparing designs and trading stickers. Parents might have seen it as just stationery, but to children it was identity, a way to show off personality in a sea of plain notebooks. The colors were unapologetically bold, reflecting the overall spirit of the decade. Even today, Lisa Frank's designs live on in nostalgia, instantly recognizable and tied to memories of backpacks stuffed with glittery folders. For many, those rainbow animals were not just drawings, they were part of growing up. The A-Team was one of television's most unforgettable shows of the 1980s. Premiering in 1983, it followed a group of ex-commandos on the run, helping people while avoiding capture. Each character had their own distinct personality, from Hannibal's leadership to B.A. Baracus's toughness. Their catchphrases, especially "I pity the fool," became pop culture staples. The show mixed action with humor, often featuring over-the-top stunts where entire vehicles flipped or exploded without anyone seriously hurt. It was formulaic in the best way. Every episode guaranteed thrills, teamwork, and a satisfying resolution. Kids adored it, imitating characters on playgrounds, while adults enjoyed the mix of comedy and excitement. The A-Team also embodied the decade's love for heroes who fought for the underdog. Merchandising followed, from lunchboxes to action figures, cementing its place in homes. Though it ran for only a few seasons, the show's impact stretched far beyond its years. Even now, the theme song and van remain instantly recognizable, symbols of a television era full of fun and adventure. Scratch and sniff stickers turned rewards into sensory delights. Teachers handed them out for good grades or good behavior, and kids eagerly collected them in sticker books. Each one came with a scent: grape, bubblegum, pizza, even popcorn, that released when scratched. They became a form of currency on playgrounds, traded and compared like treasures. Collectors sought out rare or unusual scents, proudly showing off pages filled with stickers. For kids, these were not just stickers. They were experiences that combined sight, touch, and smell. Opening a sticker book was like opening a box of memories, each scent tied to a moment in childhood. They made school achievements more exciting and transformed ordinary paper into something magical. The craze swept classrooms across the country, embedding itself in the culture of the 1980s. Even today, the faint whiff of a scratch and sniff sticker can bring back the joy of peeling, scratching, and breathing in those tiny bursts of happiness. The Nintendo Entertainment System changed home life in the 1980s more than almost any other gadget. Families who once gathered around board games or televisions suddenly had an entirely new form of entertainment. Video games you could play in your own living room. Super Mario Bros. Introduced kids to a plumber jumping across pixelated worlds, while Duck Hunt brought laughter as families aimed plastic light guns at the screen to zap cartoon birds. The NES was not just a toy, it was a phenomenon that turned children into gamers and parents into spectators, cheering or scolding as living rooms filled with the sounds of 8-bit music. Cartridges had to be blown into when they glitched, controllers were fought over, and high scores were bragged about at school. It gave kids a sense of control and adventure, creating shared experiences that became playground conversations. The NES also paved the way for gaming to become a central part of culture, spawning franchises that still thrive today. For many, that gray box with the red lettering represents the moment when technology stopped feeling like science fiction and started feeling like family fun. Roller rinks were the ultimate social stage of the 1980s. Flashing lights bounced off disco balls, pop songs blasted from speakers, and the smooth sound of wheels gliding across polished floors filled the air. Kids and teens flocked to rinks for birthday parties, first crushes, and weekend hangouts. It was where friendships were strengthened and romances quietly began, all while circling the rink in endless loops. The skates themselves were clunky and sometimes uncomfortable, but once you found your rhythm, you felt unstoppable. Couples skates created moments of nervous excitement, while games like Limbo tested balance and flair. Beyond skating, roller rinks were community hubs, offering arcade corners, snack bars, and a safe place to spend hours away from home. The neon colors, patterned carpets, and smell of popcorn combined into an atmosphere no one forgets. As the decade moved on, roller rinks slowly declined, but their memory lives on in stories, photos, and the occasional revival night. For those who grew up then, few things capture the joy of the 1980s better than skating under flashing lights with friends by your side. Mixtapes were love letters, friendship tokens, and personal soundtracks rolled into one. In the 1980s, making a mixtape meant carefully selecting songs, recording them from the radio or albums, and arranging them into a story that only music could tell. The pause and record buttons became instruments of expression, capturing feelings that words sometimes could not. People gave mixtapes to friends to share favorite songs, to crushes as subtle declarations, or to themselves as soundtracks for studying, road trips, or daydreaming. Each tape was unique, often labeled in messy handwriting with doodles or personal notes. Receiving one felt like being given a piece of someone's soul, curated just for you. Unlike playlists today, mixtapes required time, patience, and care. They were fragile too. The tape could tangle or break, and rewinding meant the satisfying click of a pencil in the reel. But those imperfections made them more real, more heartfelt. They remain one of the most personal and nostalgic symbols of the decade, reminders of when music was not just heard, but given as a gift. Cheers was one of the most beloved shows of the 1980s, a sitcom set in a Boston bar where everybody knows your name. At first, it seemed simple, just a group of regulars and bartenders trading jokes and sharing life. But the writing, the warmth, and the unforgettable characters made it something special. Sam Malone, Diane Chambers, Norm, Cliff, Carla, and Woody became like old friends to viewers who tuned in week after week. The bar was not just a set, it was a place people wanted to visit, a space where humor and heart blended effortlessly. Cheers managed to capture the struggles and joys of everyday life while always delivering laughs. Its theme song alone became iconic, a musical embrace that perfectly reflected the feeling of belonging. Families watched together, office workers talked about it the next day, and it grew into one of the longest-running and most celebrated sitcoms of its time. Even decades later, the show remains timeless, reminding us how a comedy about a bar turned into a cultural treasure. Lisa Frank stickers turned ordinary school supplies into treasures that felt almost too pretty to use. Sheets of shimmering rainbows, neon dolphins, smiling kittens, and sparkling unicorns were sold in packs that kids begged parents to buy. Collecting them became a playground obsession, with children carefully peeling and sticking them into sticker books, trading with friends, or decorating binders and pencil cases. Each sticker felt magical, a burst of color and imagination in an otherwise plain school day. They were not just stickers, they were currency, proof of taste, creativity, and status. Kids often hesitated to actually use them, saving favorites for years because they felt too special to waste. The bright colors and whimsical designs stood out in a decade already defined by bold aesthetics, cementing Lisa Frank as a name forever tied to childhood magic. For those who grew up in the 1980s, flipping through a sticker book filled with those glowing images still sparks joy. They remain timeless reminders that even small things, like a sticker sheet, can carry some of the biggest memories. Using public transportation exclusively meant your life moved on someone else's schedule. There was no jumping in the car for milk, no last-minute rides. You waited. At bus stops, on corners, in the rain, in the cold, in your Sunday best or your work shoes. The bus was never early. Sometimes it was late. But you waited. You held a pocket full of exact change. Maybe a transfer stub. You knew the routes like the back of your hand. You sat near the front if you were tired, in the back if you did not want to talk. You watched strangers argue, laugh, cry. You saw your city from a different view, block by block, stop by stop. Owning a car seemed like another world. Gas, insurance, repairs. Those were luxuries. The bus was what you had, and it was enough. Sort of. It got you to school, to work, to church. You learned to carry groceries in bags that would not break. You made friends with the drivers. You memorized delays. And when the ride was over, you stepped off into whatever came next. Public transportation did not just move you. It taught you patience, resilience, and how to hold on when the brakes hit hard. Taping songs off the radio was a sacred mission. You would sit for hours next to your boombox, finger hovering over the record button, praying that the next song would be the one. And when it was, you had one shot to catch it clean, no static, no interruptions, and above all, no DJ talking over the intro. But of course, they always did. The opening notes would hit, your heart would race, and just as you hit record, that was the latest from Madonna. Coming up next, we've got... And just like that, your perfect mixtape moment was ruined. You would yell at the radio like the DJ could hear you. Why? Why do you do this to me? It was a battle of timing and nerves. Some kids got sneaky and recorded during the night shift when the hosts were quieter. Others became masters of timing, predicting when the chorus would drop, when the ad break would hit. It took real skill. And even if you missed a few seconds of the intro, you still labeled the tape like it was gold. You were not just building a playlist, you were capturing a moment. Free music, sure, but earned through effort, patience, and pure willpower. And if you were serious about your song collection, you were not stopping at one track. You were building an entire soundscape, one emotional banger at a time. Walk into an old house and open a closet door, and you might get hit with a smell that is oddly comforting. Woody, warm, a little spicy. That would be cedar, not a scent diffuser, not a spray. Actual cedar wood, lined across the walls of the closet from top to bottom. These cedar-lined closets were the silent guardians of America's wardrobes. They protected against moths, mildew, and musty smells. But they also added a kind of rustic luxury, like storing your clothes inside a tree trunk at a high-end cabin. The idea was simple. Cedar wood naturally repels insects, so why not turn your entire closet into a bug-proof haven? People did not just store coats in there, they kept heirlooms, wool suits, and seasonal clothes safe year-round. Some closets were fully lined, others just had a single cedar panel on one wall. Either way, it gave the whole room a spa vibe long before that was a thing. These days, you might see cedar blocks or hangers sold in stores, but entire closets made of the stuff? That has faded into the woodwork, literally. The world got synthetic, and the cedar charm became a relic. But if you think that was clever, wait until you see how people used to pass food across rooms without ever leaving their chair. Slap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity, almost overnight. They were simple. A metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. Limited extracurricular activities were just another way the world reminded you what you could not afford. Other kids had piano lessons, karate classes, and sports teams with matching uniforms. You had afternoons at home watching TV or playing outside with a stick and a rock. Sign-up fees were too high, equipment cost too much. Even the rides to practice were out of reach if the car was needed for work. You brought home the flyers from school and left them on the table, hoping. Sometimes they just disappeared. Sometimes your parents gently explained that maybe next time meant probably never. You cheered from the sidelines, you watched from the crowd, and you learned how to clap with a smile even when your heart wanted in. It was not fair, it stung, but you found other ways to grow. You read library books, you drew comics in the margins of your notebook, you played tag until the sun went down, and maybe you missed out on trophies and tournaments, but you learned resilience, creativity, and how to find joy in the quiet spaces. You might not have worn the jersey, but you still showed up, and that mattered. Blank VHS tapes were not just empty plastic boxes. They were treasure chests, the kind you could label, relabel, and fill up with your own little corner of television history. You remember the sound, right? That whirring click as the VCR accepted your latest recording project, whether it was The Muppet Show, a Disney movie airing on Saturday night, or just some random commercials you ended up watching later like they were rare artifacts. Back then, taping something off television was serious business. You had to time it perfectly. Hit record at just the right moment, or risk catching the tail end of a news anchor saying, "And now," before your show started. Fast-forwarding past commercials felt like a power move. Rewinding? An art form. And if you had one of those little tape rewinder machines shaped like a car, you were basically living in luxury. You wrote on those little white stickers with a level of care that rivaled school projects. Do not tape over. Disney only. Toys R Us ad. Keep forever. And when someone in the house recorded over your stuff with a football game, that was war. But if you wanted to really test your patience and your brain power, there was only one screen-based challenge that ruled them all. Long before cell phones and even before cordless landlines, families had a different way of yelling through the walls. And no, it was not just yelling. We are talking about intercom systems. Installed in kitchens, bedrooms, garages, and hallways, these things were high-tech at the time. Built right into the wall, they had push buttons, tinny speakers, and a magical call button that could summon anyone from anywhere. It was like living inside your own hotel. "Dinner's ready!" would echo from speaker to speaker. You could check in on the baby, call the kids in from the yard, or talk to your spouse while still folding laundry. They even had a radio function in some fancier models, so you could blast the news or music in every room. These systems were sold as time savers, but they also showed off how cutting-edge your home was. Nothing said modern American household like a wall-mounted microphone next to your fridge. Eventually, of course, they wore out, the wiring went bad, or the kids used them to eavesdrop, and just like that, they fell out of style, replaced by text messages, smart speakers, and yelling again. But if you ever stayed at Grandma's house and heard your name echo through a crackly little box, you will never forget it. Now, how about something we used to build into the wall that flipped down like a magic trick? Get ready, because we are unfolding something special. Mixtapes were handwritten love letters wrapped in cassette cases. You waited by the radio for hours just to hit record at the perfect moment, trying to catch the start of your favorite song without the DJ talking over it. You rewound, replayed, and carefully curated the perfect order so each track melted into the next. Some were made for crushes, others for best friends. Some were sorry tapes, and some were just because. Each one had a theme, a purpose, and a heart behind it. You picked songs that said what you could not. Then you labeled the tape in your best handwriting, maybe decorated the case, and handed it over like it was treasure. Because it was. A great mixtape took hours, sometimes days, to get just right. And when someone gave you one, you listened to it until the tape wore thin and the sound warped. Mixtapes were not just music. They were memories, feelings, time capsules wrapped in magnetic ribbon. And long after the songs faded, you remembered the person who made it, their handwriting, their choices, their message. Even now, in a world of playlists, nothing hits quite like the soft click of a tape deck and a song you once recorded just for someone else. Saturday morning cartoons were not just shows. They were rituals. You would wake up at 6 or 7, bowl of cereal in hand, and stake out your spot in front of the television before anyone else in the house even stirred. Pajamas still on, eyes still half shut. But you were ready. The networks fought hard for your attention. ABC, NBC, CBS, they all rolled out animated powerhouses like The Smurfs, He-Man, The Real Ghostbusters, Gem, G.I. Joe, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Each show had its slot, and missing one felt like missing a holiday. But for every golden episode came the heartbreak of your favorite show being bumped, or worse, replaced. The dreaded special news report could interrupt your flow like a slap to the face. You would sit there in disbelief as your cartoon got pulled for a political debate or weather update. No warnings, no mercy. Still, the lineup gave you something to look forward to all week, and for those few hours, everything felt right in the world. Cartoons, cereal, and commercials that somehow got stuck in your head forever. Because let's be honest, there are still jingles from that era that we can sing from memory, word for word. DIY haircuts at home were a gamble wrapped in a towel and held together by hope. The kitchen turned into a salon, a dining chair became the barber's throne. Mom or dad grabbed the dullest scissors in the drawer and told you to sit still. You did, kind of. And snip by snip, your identity changed. Bangs went crooked, sideburns vanished. One side always ended up shorter. They tilted your head like that would help. You watched the clumps fall, hoping for the best. Sometimes it ended in tears, sometimes in laughs, but most often in silence and a baseball cap. You went to school the next day pretending nothing happened, but everyone knew. They always knew. DIY haircuts were not about style. They were about saving $20 and making it stretch. Hair grew back, groceries did not. So you endured the bowl cuts, the buzz jobs, the two short layers that stuck out like antennas. You got used to it. And after a while, it became normal. A family ritual, a budget tradition. Looking back, those crooked cuts carried more than just uneven lines. They carried effort, sacrifice, and a strange kind of love that you only see when the hair starts to grow in. MTV in the 1980s was not just a channel, it was a movement. The second you heard that iconic, "I want my MTV," you knew you were about to step into another world. A world where music lived on your screen, not just your speakers. Where your favorite artist could become a visual legend. It played music videos, actual music videos, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That meant you could go from watching Cyndi Lauper dancing through city streets to seeing Michael Jackson turn into a werewolf without ever leaving your couch. Music became cinematic. Performances became stories. Seeing someone on TV who made you feel like you were not the only weirdo out there. And maybe, just maybe, being a weirdo was cool. MTV introduced you to bands you never heard of, genres you never explored, and visuals that burned into your brain like neon on wet pavement. You would tape videos, argue over countdowns, and swear that your favorite video was art. But when you got back to school, it was back to basics, and one look at your folder would say everything your mouth could not. That was thanks to ceiling-mounted radio speakers, built-in audio systems that piped mono sound into every room of the house. They were a mid-century dream, a touch of Jetsons-style modernity, long before smart homes were even an idea. The radio unit was usually installed in the kitchen or living room, with a big dial and a few large buttons. You could pick a station, adjust the volume, and suddenly, the whole house was in sync. Of course, these systems had limitations. There was no surround sound, no playlists, just whatever the station was playing that day. But at the time, that was luxury. It was like the house had a voice. Eventually, stereo systems, boomboxes, and personal devices replaced the need. But if you ever stood under one of those tinny speakers and listened to Glenn Miller on a crackly station, you knew you were living in the future. Speaking of visions of the future, what about a bathroom that was all one color? Acid wash jeans were loud before you even opened your mouth. With their blotchy patterns and faded splotches, they looked like someone had taken a bleach bottle to denim, and somehow, that became cool. These jeans were rebellious, messy, and unmistakably 1980s. Everyone had a pair. Some wore them tight-rolled at the ankle, others let them drape over high-top sneakers. Acid wash showed up in jackets, skirts, and full matching sets that turned entire outfits into walking eye strain. You could not blend in wearing acid wash. You stood out, and that was the point. It was denim with attitude. Rough, bold, a little chaotic. Parents hated it. Teachers rolled their eyes. But teens embraced the weirdness. It felt edgy, like you were wearing the uniform of a generation that refused to dress quietly. Old photographs now show groups of kids lined up in front of lockers, each one looking like they had just emerged from a bleach accident and loving it. Acid wash was not timeless, it was not flattering, but it was unforgettable. And in a decade known for excess, it fit right in. Even now, pulling on an old pair brings back the noise, the neon, and the thrill of breaking the fashion rules. Reliance on government assistance programs was not a choice, it was the only way to get by. Food stamps came in paper booklets, torn out in the checkout line with quiet hands and sideways glances. School lunches were free, but they came with their own kind of price. Standing in a separate line, hearing the whispers, seeing the looks. You carried a different card, a different meal, a different kind of burden. The people behind the counter never said anything. But you knew. Everyone knew. At home, government cheese filled the fridge. Powdered milk sat on the shelf. The pantry was stocked with cans stamped from surplus stores, beans, peanut butter, cereal that tasted like cardboard but kept you full. Your parents made it stretch. They made it work. And they told you to hold your head up even when you wished you could vanish. Because pride does not feed a family. Assistance was not shameful. It was survival. It was how your shoes fit, how your stomach was full, how you still made it to class with something in your bag. And though some days it felt heavy, it also meant someone somewhere, knew you were worth helping, even when the world made you forget. You had not lived until you beat the Oregon Trail without dying of dysentery. That was the holy grail of 1980s computer gaming. Those chunky gray computers in the school lab, that pixelated map, that relentless text box reminding you that little Timothy had broken a leg and your oxen just drowned crossing a river. Iconic. It was not just a game, it was survival. You learned real-life lessons in that pixel wilderness, like how much meat you could carry back from a hunt, not much, or why you should never try to ford a river without thinking it through. And somehow, we were totally into it. The green and black graphics, the clunky keyboard, the fact that it felt like schoolwork but kind of fun. You would all huddle around one screen, a group of 5 kids making group decisions like mini pioneers, and somehow it felt like the fate of your wagon family actually mattered. It was your first taste of choices in gaming, your first little moral dilemmas. Do you trade clothing for bullets? Do you rest for 2 days? Or do you push on and risk everyone freezing to death? Still, once the school bell rang, it was game over. And if you wanted to know what was playing in theaters that weekend, you did not Google it. You picked up the phone. Before there were curling wands, flat irons, and hair straighteners with 10 settings, there was one holy grail of home beauty, the built-in hairdryer chair. That is right, just like the ones at the salon. These were dome-shaped dryers, fixed right into vanities or dressing tables, and they were everything. Sit down, flip a switch, and suddenly your head was enveloped in a low hum of warm air. These machines were especially popular in the 1950s and 1960s when hairstyles like the beehive or the bouffant required serious volume and serious time. The dryers were sleek, futuristic, and a little noisy, but they got the job done. Housewives would sit under them while flipping through magazines, sipping coffee, or catching up on the neighborhood gossip. Some units were even foldable, tucking away neatly when not in use. Today, we think of beauty appliances as portable and handheld. But back then, hair care was an event, and the home adapted accordingly. These built-in dryer chairs turned the average bathroom into a personal beauty parlor. Sadly, they went the way of Aquanet and home perms. But speaking of gossip, let us head into the hallway because the next stop is where stories were shared, secrets were spilled, and teenage hearts skipped a beat. Television antenna adjustments were part of the evening routine, just like brushing your teeth or fighting over the remote. Before streaming, before digital signals, there were rabbit ears, 2 shiny rods that stood on top of the television like alien feelers. Getting a clear picture meant twisting them in random directions, adjusting one while the other stayed stubbornly out of reach. Sometimes you needed to stand on one foot. Sometimes the only way to get the signal was to hold the antenna yourself and stay there, frozen, arm extended, human satellite. Someone from the couch would yell, "Right there, do not move," and you would stay stuck in position, sacrificing comfort for clarity. Foil was added for better reception. Coat hangers became tools of innovation. And if the weather was bad, good luck. The static would return like an uninvited guest. It was frustrating, yes, but it was also communal. Families worked together to solve the mystery of the fuzzy screen. You cheered when the picture came in. You groaned when it disappeared mid-show. Antenna adjustments were the dance of analog television. Awkward, unpredictable, and always a little magical when they actually worked. Homemade school lunches in washed-out containers were the unofficial lunchbox of every frugal family. Forget the cartoon thermos or the shiny metal lunch pail. If you were poor in the 1980s, your sandwich came wrapped in wax paper and packed in an empty margarine tub. Maybe the lid said country crock, but inside was leftover spaghetti or peanut butter crackers. You used the same container every day. The label peeled, the edges warped, but it worked. Your drink? Not a juice box. Maybe a reused jelly jar with watered-down Kool-Aid. You prayed it did not leak. In the lunchroom, you sat next to kids with perfectly packed snacks, cheese sticks, pudding cups, chips with real logos. You ate quietly, or fast, or not at all. But at home, it made sense. those containers stacked neatly in the cupboard. Your parents washed them each night and packed them again with care. It was not about shame. It was about stretching every cent. And even though you knew it was different, you also knew it was made with effort, maybe even love. Those stained lids and handwritten notes stuffed under the sandwich were signs of sacrifice. And now, all grown up, they feel like something you miss. Owning a Trapper Keeper in the 1980s felt like owning a briefcase made just for kids, but with neon colors, Velcro, and personality. These were not just folders. These were statements. You did not just store your homework in a Trapper Keeper. You stored your identity. From bold geometric designs to wild illustrations of race cars, dolphins, or laser grids that looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie, the outside of your Trapper Keeper said something about you. And that satisfying rip of the Velcro? That was music. It had pockets for pencils, slots for notes, compartments you never used but felt cooler just knowing they were there. There was something so absurdly organized about them that it made you want to turn your life into a schedule. You would write the dates on your notebook dividers, color code your subjects, and then forget all of it by Wednesday. But hey, the effort was there. You felt important carrying one around. It made you feel like you were growing up, and even if you never opened it for anything other than doodling weird cartoons during math class, it still felt like a win. But when it came to keeping track of things, there was one object that really made you feel like a collector, and not just of stuff, but of memories. Let us talk about the Rumpus room. If the living room was where adults behaved themselves, the Rumpus room was where the kids got wild. Usually tucked away in the basement, this was the unofficial playground of every suburban household from the 1950s to the 1970s. Carpeted in wall-to-wall shag, lit by lava lamps, and often filled with beanbag chairs, dartboards, and mismatched furniture, the Rumpus room was every child's dream and every parent's secret weapon. You could send the kids down there for hours, let them roughhouse, make noise, and burn off all that energy while the grown-ups enjoyed some blessed peace upstairs. It was not about looking nice, it was about cutting loose. Some had jukeboxes, others had board games stacked to the ceiling, and every now and then, you would find a couch that doubled as a trampoline. It was chaos, but it was controlled chaos. Over time, the idea faded as homes got bigger and open concepts took over. Now, everything is multifunctional. But there was something beautiful about a room that existed just for noise, mess, and memory-making. The name says it all, Rumpus. No rules, just vibes. But even in the loudest house, you still needed a way to call the kids upstairs. And you will not believe how we used to do that. Shoulder pads were not just a trend, they were a transformation. You could put on a blazer and suddenly feel like a corporate warrior, even if you were just headed to homeroom. The goal was to look powerful, confident, and vaguely like a football player on a job interview. From business suits to casual blouses, shoulder pads invaded every piece of clothing in the 1980s. You could not escape them. They were sewn in, velcroed on, or added as an afterthought to make your silhouette scream important. The bigger the pad, the better. Entire generations walked around with squared-off shoulders and structured poise, looking ready to charge into a boardroom or a runway. Some tried to remove them only to realize the entire shirt deflated without the padding. They were ridiculous, and we knew it, but they worked. You stood a little taller, felt a little braver, and if someone bumped into you in the hallway, your outfit absorbed the blow. Looking back now, they seem comically oversized, but at the time, they were armor, fashion armor. And for anyone who wore them, they were a reminder that style was not just about looking good, it was about looking like you meant business. Heating only one room in winter was not just a strategy, it was survival. The whole house might be freezing, but one space stayed warm. Maybe it was the living room with a kerosene heater. Maybe the kitchen with the oven door cracked open. You brought in extra blankets. You wore your coat indoors. Everyone piled in, like penguins sharing body heat. You did homework at the coffee table, ate soup from mismatched bowls, slept on the couch or a pile of comforters laid out on the floor. The hallway felt like Antarctica. The bathroom? A short, icy sprint. At night, The cold crept into your bones, but during the day, you all huddled in that one room like it was the center of the universe. Parents told kids to keep the door shut. Do not let the heat out. No one dared argue. It was about bills, about making it to spring. And even though it felt unfair at the time, it also brought people close. Literally, you learned to share space, to pass the time, to be warm in more ways than one. Heating one room was not ideal, but it was home, and somehow it got you through. The 1980s gave us so many things to love, so tell us your favorite memory in the comments, give this video a like if it brought a smile, and subscribe so we can keep reliving the moments that made growing up unforgettable.